Mobilux. Seriously, I'm tired of this now. I've been telling you so many times that you can't deal damage with the barbarian. The only thing you're good for is being big and being tanky, okay? You should listen to me. I'm an expert in damage. I've been doing guides about DPS for a long time now. So please just quit this nonsense now and switch class, because this is getting nowhere, okay? So, yeah, I have nothing else to say to you right now. Hello, where are you going? Why are you not responding to me? Whoa, that's crazy. I mean, I could never believe a barbarian could deal this much damage. Bro, you have to tell us how you're doing this. Is it okay if I share this with my viewers?
Yes, please, go ahead. I'm happy to share with you guys.
Okay, cool. So maybe let us first take a look at your skills.
Sure. We're having Hammer of the Ancients, Chain Spear, Wrath of Berserker, Sprint, and Lacerate as the primary attack.
And the essences?
In the helm slot, we are using Auslag Helmet, and that essence, while your sprint is active, empowers all of your projectiles with wind, and that allows those to trigger Firestorm and deals additional damage.
As I understand, this syncs very well with the chest piece?
That's right. So in the chest piece, we're having Shackled Fate, which is a chain spear essence, and those chains are essentially considered projectiles, and they do trigger Firestorm, and that is a very nice essence that work nicely together with the helmet.
Crazy good interaction. And what about the shoulder?
Shoulder, we have Nature's Temper, which is a Wrath of the Berserker essence, and whenever your Wrath is active, your primary attacks deal additional damage.
Okay, cool. And then the pants?
Buried Talons, which is a simple or flat damage increase whenever you activate Chain Spear.
And the main hand, the first one?
Here we have Rending Bite, a Lacerate essence, and that inflicts bleeding to your enemy, and that actually goes very nicely hand in hand with our first offhand that we're using, which is Falling Thunder, another Wrath of the Berserker essence, and that lets you deal 28% more damage whenever your Wrath of the Berserker is active and at the same time is near a bleeding enemy. And since Rending Bite inflicts bleeding, those two essences work very nicely together.
And how about the second main hand?
Second main hand is called Stonefall, which is an essence that makes your Hammer of the Ancients deal 19% more damage.
Maybe this syncs then with the final offhand.
Yep, so our second offhand is the newly released Flickertone essence with the latest update, and this is another Hammer of the Ancients essence, and I have to say this is an incredibly strong essence, as all of your other attacks are charging your hammer up, basically, and whenever it's fully charged, you do more damage. And basically every tick you're doing is from dots or from attacks, whatever, is charging your hammer. And again, whenever it's fully charged, it's going nuts. And yeah, I think we've seen that at the dummy.
Okay, great. But I guess that not only essences matters in terms of making a build, so maybe also let us go through your set pieces.
You're absolutely right. When it comes to set pieces, we are using 2 pieces of Urge to increase your beneficial effect duration, 2 pieces of Banquet of Ice to deal 15% more damage to enemies that are suffering continual damage, and 4 pieces of Grace.
Okay, so let's take a look at the Legendary Gems as well, and maybe start with the helmet slot here.
So here we have Grim Rhythm. That gem increases your attack speed. We have Plane Clasp, which increases your damage when you deal to enemies suffering continual damage. Gloom Cask, in my opinion, a very strong gem when it comes to primary attack builds. Generally speaking, we have Bottled Hope, plain damage increase. Fervent Fang, super strong PvE 2-star gem, another flat damage increase when you get it at rank 10 up to 30%, which is super high. Riding Consequence increases your critical hit damage, likewise as Mother's Lament also increases your critical hit damage. And lastly, we have Blood-Soaked Jade, also essentially a DPS gem, really.
Okay, so now we've seen all the gems here. There is one question I have. I don't see Grim Rhythm go into all of the DPS builds. Is there a certain reason why you have picked Grim Rhythm here?
Yeah, for this particular build, there is in fact a reason. And that is that we are basically using the vanilla Wrath of the Berserker. And the vanilla skill grants you a 50% increase in attack speed. But that buff, unfortunately, doesn't stack with the 4-piece effect of Vithus, which is why I was putting the 4 pieces Vithus out and put in the 2 pieces of Banquet of Ice. And now we're having Grim Rhythm, which is giving you at rank 10 a 24% increase in attack speed. And if I'm adding this up with my base attack speed, I'm almost at 100% attack speed, which is the cap. And I've really noticed for this build that I do benefit from a high attack speed, because that allows you to get in as many as possible primary attacks while you're not hammering. I know the cooldown is super tiny or super short rather, but whatever you can get in the meantime, that really increases your damage. And again, I've certainly seen a difference in DPS when it comes to attack speed here.
Yeah, because if I understand it correctly, I'm not a barbarian, but this new hammer essence is getting charged each time you do an attack.
Yep, exactly.
And then you want to use the hammer when it's fully charged, and of course, with higher attack speed, you're able to refill this energy bar as fast as possible. Am I right?
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I know exactly why you picked Grim Rhythm. And yeah, I mean, now we have looked at the essences, the skills, the set piece, and the legendary gems, which is maybe the core of the build. But of course, we also like to dive a little bit deeper into some details. So maybe we can also take a look at your Reforges next.
So yeah, when it comes to Reforges, I'm personally a big fan of the Vengeance family. And for PvE content, this is my setup, using damage to enemies suffering loss of control, damage to demons, which I think is a very strong Reforge when it comes to PvE content in general, as basically all of the monsters out there are demons. Also, almost every boss in gauntlets and raids are demons, so you really benefit from the specific Reforge within the Vengeance family. Lastly, I have attack speed, which again we were just discussing. It's very helpful, generally speaking. So then we have duration of beneficial effects, which is probably one of the most crucial Reforges for arguably every class. And lastly, I am using critical hit damage increased, which is in my opinion also extremely strong, because when we are talking about a combination of the gems Roiling Consequence and Mother's Lament, then you just simply benefit from critical hit damage increase significantly.
Yeah, so the thumb rule is that the higher your critical hit chance is, the more efficient your critical hit damage becomes. Thank you so much for going through the Reforges. Maybe we can also take a look at your Paragon quick.
Paragon, I'm using Slinger with all of the 5 points of the former Weaver Paragon tree. To be honest, I have looked into combining the Weaver Paragon points, or skills rather, with some of the others within the Slinger Paragon, but I personally really could achieve any increase in damage, so it depends on the class, I suppose, but for Barbarian, I'm sticking to the 5 on top there.
Let us take a look at your familiar that you're using.
So yeah, I'm using a Dragon with Lingering Wounds, and also with High Insight, which increases the armor break effect of your Lingering Wounds, and I think at 35.9%, and that is just very, very strong for every PvE content. Maybe
you can also mention some options when it comes to the curse effects. What would be optimal for this build?
Yeah, personally, I'm a big fan of Lash, 6 pieces of Lash, because of the short cooldown. I don't have it equipped right now because I've been grinding for Battlegrounds, and there I'm using 6 pieces of Nettled. But I think another options that you could use for DPS is a Trophied, which is also kind of a nice damage increase.
Okay, great. And we also have a lot of new interesting Eternal Affixes from the Terror Essences. Is it anything you use for this build?
Super important, in my view, is the Wrath of the Berserker Eternal Affix, and I have stacked up 4 pieces of that affix, which triggers an extra explosion every 0.5 seconds, and that really does make a significant increase in your DPS if you can stack that up.
Okay, perfect. I think that we have a very great picture now how you can accomplish this type of damage. Personally, I had no clue that Barbarian could dish out this much. Let us take a look at that dummy run once again, maybe in slow motion, so we can see the huge damage output and also the amazing crits that you managed to achieve. And after that, we gonna move on, and you have also told me that you have a very cool dungeon build to share with us.
Yes, absolutely.
Before we start looking at the dungeon build, maybe you can tell us why you're not using the top DPS one.
So you can absolutely use the build we've just looked at in dungeons, and it actually works perfectly fine. But I personally prefer the dungeon build we will be looking at now because it feels to me slightly more smooth, and you don't have to spam one single skill like crazy. And all over, I feel like your mobility is also slightly higher, and you go faster through dungeons. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe take a look at the skills first then here.
So when it comes to skills, we're using Sprint, Chainspear, Wrath of the Berserker, and Cleave. And as a primary, we're now switching back to Frenzy.
Okay, and as I understand, we have changed out a few essences compared to the DPS build. Which essences are we talking about here?
So what's different in this build is, since we're not using Lacerate anymore and we're using now Frenzy, one of our main hands is different now. We swapped it to Lunatic Twin, and Lunatic Twin, essentially when your Frenzy is fully stacked, you deal additional damage, and those actually also trigger Firestorm, which is quite nice in combination with the helmet. So we also swapped out our second main hand essence to Borrowed Might, which is a Cleave essence that grants you a spirit around you, dealing damage to enemies. And what I want to point out here is that this essence does actually trigger a bleed at your enemy. Some people don't know this because it doesn't specifically say in the skill description, but I've tested it, and it does inflict a bleed effect, which is also why this essence works very nicely again with the first offhand Falling Sunder that we had in the previous build as well, but that simply increases your damage by 28% while you're standing next to a bleeding enemy. So our second offhand is called Bergbreaker, which is another Wrath of the Berserker essence, and that one has been buffed with the recent patch, and I have to say it's now super strong. And it essentially deals damage to the enemy whenever you get attacked. And Bergbreaker now also works perfectly hand in hand with our shoulder, Nature's Temper.
Okay, just wait a second. Are you saying that the Bergbreaker offhand somehow syncs very well with the shoulder? Can you explain that a little bit more in depth?
So yeah, exactly. So since Bergbreaker only gets triggered whenever you attack, it works very nicely with the shoulder's Nature's Temper, because that shoulder actually consumes your life while you're doing primary attacks, and that is also considered being attacked. And therefore, Bergbreaker is essentially being triggered all the time whenever you do primary attacks.
Okay, well, that's a very cool and interesting interaction. I didn't think of that myself, to be honest. So that was a really, really nice find of you. And the set pieces, are they the same as in the DPS build?
Not quite, but almost. Here we're using 4 pieces of Vithus and 4 pieces of Grace, and that works perfectly fine.
Yeah, and this is because now we no longer use the vanilla Wrath of the Berserker.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and in terms of the legendary gems, I can see that the only change here compared to the DPS version is that you use Berserker's Eye instead of Grim Rhythm. And I guess that this is because we now use 4 pieces of Vitu, and also we use Frenzy that gives us extra attack speed, so maybe we don't need Grim Rhythm anymore. Am I correct?
Perfectly said.
Okay, I mean, of course, the Reforges are the same as well, I guess.
Yep.
But
Exactly.
perhaps you have made some changes to the Paragon. My guess would be that you are using the Brawler.
Yeah, for dungeons, I'm using Brawler simply because of the size increase, which increases your movement speed.
Yeah, also I forgot to ask you earlier, but my guess is that you are using the damage room when you are doing the DPS. But for dungeons, you're probably switching it out for Protector, right? For extra size.
No, you're absolutely right, yeah.
Yeah, and just if someone doesn't know, if you manage to increase your size, you will run faster. And this is, of course, one of the most important things in dungeons. And in the Protector room, you can find this Warband Remnant here that I'm showing. That's called Shepherd's Burden, which will increase your size. Oh yes, and finally, when we talk about the Eternal Affixes, I guess that it's the Wrath of the Berserker one that's the most important one for this dungeon build as well. Am I right?
Yes, it's the same. And I stand by what I said earlier. It's super, super strong.
Okay, perfect. So I guess that the only thing that we need to do now is to see how this dungeon build works in action, and perhaps you can take us through the dungeons and explain to us why you are doing certain choices and how you play the build. Is that okay for you?
Sure. Let's go ahead and have a look at the dungeons.
Okay, awesome. And I just want to thank you so much for coming back to enlighten us with your deep knowledge about this game. And I hope to have you back on the channel very soon again, Mobilux.
No, I have to thank you. Again, it was a pleasure, and happy to share some of the barbarian content through your channel. And let's do something again in the future.
Okay, great. So now let's dive straight into the dungeon. You take it away, Mobilux.
Okay, fast forward to the elevator in Pit of Anguish. And now we get down and directly activate Sprint, of course. But we are not using Wrath of the Berserker here in order to keep our lingering runes from the pet for the boss now. And those 90 million go down very fast. Now we gotta sprint to the last boss. Passing all the mobs while almost dying. And keep in mind those are Inferno 3 dungeons, and the final boss Saka here also goes down first phase very quickly. It's a good damage that we're dealing here. And there we go, the dungeon is done. Off to the next. Here we are in the Forgotten Tower now, and you see we're dealing enough damage that the tree opens up already so that we can get through to the boss. There we go. And it's already down. That was quite fast. Now we gotta get rid of the remaining mobs in order to get to the next phase. And what I'd like to point out here when it comes to AoE damage, and I think we can nicely see this in the Forgotten Tower, is the combination of both Bergbreaker and the Eternal Affix of Wrath of the Berserker, where we have those explosions and those retaliations from Bergbreaker. And they even have quite a huge range, I would say, that deals a significant amount of AoE damage. And in my view, this is a very nice alternative to the existing helmet essence called Brace of the Ancestors, where you deal damage to your surrounding enemies, basically AoE damage, whenever you do your primary attack. But this is not necessary. It's not necessary if we are combining the Eternal Affix and Bergbreaker. And here we are already at the final boss. Now it's just about nuking it down. And there you have it. That again was pretty fast. And that's it. Thank you guys so much, and see you next time.
Guess who's back with some brand new content? Hit the bell button, maybe leave a comment. Oroth with the swagger, wanna see his game. Teach you all the secrets, it will be insane. Guess who's back with a brand new lesson? He will have the answer if you have a question. Oroth invites you to his awesome tribe. No more time to waste, it's time to hit subscribe. 1, 2, 3 is the man of our affection. 4, 5, 6 only aiming for perfection. 7, 8, 9 he is 10 out of 10. Subscribe and you will never miss a video again.